The great council chamber of Zelnathi Prime stretched before Jake Morrison like a vast arena designed to make him feel small. Towering pillars of crystalline metal reached toward a dome that showed the swirling colors of the galaxy beyond. Around him sat the most powerful beings in known space, their alien forms casting strange shadows in the chamber's blue light. Jake stood alone at the center of the chamber, wearing his best diplomatic uniform. The fabric felt heavy on his shoulders as thousands of eyes from dozens of different species watched his every move. He had come here as Earth's ambassador, carrying the hopes of 40 billion humans scattered across 100 worlds. The charges against humanity echoed through the chamber in a dozen different languages, all translated instantly by the Council's ancient systems. Excessive militarization, dangerous unpredictability, threat to galactic peace. The words hit Jake like physical blows, each accusation more serious than the last. Empress Zarath of the Veltari rose from her throne, her four arms spreading wide as she spoke. Her voice carried the authority of 10,000 years of galactic rule. "The humans have shown us what they are," she declared. "When the Kresh attacked their mining colony on Kepler 7, did they surrender as any reasonable species would? No. They turned their excavation equipment into weapons and fought like wild animals." The insectoid Kresh delegate clicked his mandibles in agreement. His compound eyes reflected the chamber's light like black mirrors as he added his own accusations. They converted cargo haulers into battleships. They taught civilian miners to fight like soldiers. They refused to accept defeat even when victory is impossible. Jake felt his hands clench into fists but forced them to relax. He had trained for this moment for months, studying every council species and their customs. He knew that showing anger would only prove their point about human unpredictability. "Honored council members," Jake began, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "Humanity has never started a war. Every conflict we have fought has been in defense of our homes and families. We adapt because we must survive." The synthetic being known as Nexus Prime Coordinator X7 spoke next, its mechanical voice devoid of emotion. "Adaptation beyond normal parameters indicates dangerous instability. Our calculations show a 97.3% probability that humans will cause major galactic disruption within the next century." Dr. Lisa Grant stepped forward from the human delegation area. As Earth's leading expert on alien biology, she had studied every species in the Council. Her voice carried the calm authority of scientific knowledge as she addressed the chamber. "What you call dangerous unpredictability is simply human nature," she explained. "We are a young species learning to survive in a hostile galaxy. Every adaptation you mention came from necessity, not aggression. We turn mining equipment into weapons because we have no choice when attacked." Captain Ryan Cole moved to stand beside her. His military uniform bore the scars of a dozen battles, each one fought to protect human colonies from alien raiders or hostile environments. "We fight because we protect what matters to us," he said simply. "Family, friends, home, these things are worth any sacrifice." The council chamber filled with the sounds of alien languages as delegates discussed among themselves. Jake could see the fear in their alien features, the way they looked at the small human delegation as if they were looking at dangerous predators rather than diplomats. The Zephyrian trade representative spoke next, his translucent form shimmering with nervous energy. "The humans trade fairly and honor their agreements," he admitted reluctantly. "But they also learn too quickly. They master our technologies in years when it should take decades. They ask too many questions about things that do not concern them." Jake realized with growing horror that humanity's greatest strengths were being twisted into evidence of their danger. Their curiosity became suspicion. Their adaptability became instability. Their refusal to surrender became aggression. The trial continued for hours as witness after witness testified about human actions. The picture they painted was not of a violent species but of one that refused to accept the galaxy's established order. Humans questioned why some species ruled while others served. They helped weak species defend themselves instead of accepting their fate. They innovated solutions that other species had never considered. Finally, Empress Zarath called for the final vote. One by one, the council species declared their decision. The Veltari voted for banishment. The Kresh hive mind agreed unanimously. The Nexus Collective calculated that removal was the optimal solution. Even species that had benefited from human trade and protection voted against them, too afraid to stand alone against the Council's power. When the last vote was cast, Empress Zarath stood once more, Her voice filled the chamber with the weight of absolute authority. By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, humanity is hereby banished from civilized space. All human colonies within Council territory must be evacuated within one solar cycle. Any human vessel found in Council space after this period will be destroyed without warning. The Kresh delegate's mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he added, "The primitive species will either perish in the void beyond the outer rim or remain forever contained where they can threaten no one." Jake felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. He had come here hoping to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy's established powers. Instead, he was witnessing the end of humanity's place in galactic civilization. But as he looked around the chamber at the alien faces watching him with mixture of fear and relief, Jake felt something else growing inside him. Not despair, but determination. These beings had made a choice based on fear rather than wisdom, and fear always led to mistakes. He walked slowly toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. At the doorway, he turned back to face the assembled council one final time. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's translation systems, reaching every delegate in their own language. "You have made a grave mistake," Jake said quietly. "You think banishing us will solve your problem, but you have only made it worse. Humanity does not die quietly in dark corners of the galaxy. We thrive there. And when we return, you will understand what you have truly unleashed." The chamber doors closed behind the human delegation with a sound like thunder, leaving the Galactic Council to contemplate what they had just done. None of them yet understood that they had not eliminated a threat, but created something far more dangerous than they could imagine. 5 years had passed since the Council's judgment, and Captain Amy Davis watched the stars change through the viewport of her command ship. The constellation patterns were different here beyond the outer rim, strange and unfamiliar against the black void of space. Behind her stretched a convoy of 300 ships carrying the largest migration in human history. Amy had been a merchant captain before the banishment, hauling cargo between Earth's colonies in peaceful trade routes. Now she commanded a fleet of converted vessels that bore little resemblance to their original designs. The luxury cruise liner beside her flagship bristled with weapon arrays and armor plating. The agricultural transport ahead carried defensive shields that could stop plasma cannon fire. Every ship in the convoy told the same story of human adaptation. When faced with exile in dangerous space, humanity had done what it always did. They had changed, adapted, and turned their tools of peace into instruments of survival. Engineer Ben Parker floated through the zero-gravity workshop deep inside the converted freighter that served as the fleet's main repair facility. Around him, dozens of technicians worked on projects that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. They were installing military-grade shields on civilian transports, upgrading cargo bay doors to launch missile pods, and converting passenger quarters into fighter pilot ready rooms. Ben had spent months designing these modifications, working with salvaged materials and improvised solutions. The Council species had expected humanity to die quietly in the void beyond their borders. Instead, humans had taken every piece of equipment they could carry and transformed it into something new and dangerous. The luxury yacht, floating past his workshop window, now carried sensor arrays powerful enough to detect enemy ships across entire star systems. The mining vessel beside it had been fitted with drilling lasers that could cut through battleship armor. Even the small personal shuttles carried communication jammers and electronic warfare packages. Dr. Karen Smith stood in the laboratory section of the science vessel that had once been a passenger liner. Before her floated samples of materials that should not have existed according to Council science. The dark matter crystals glowed with inner light, while the quantum metals shifted between different states of matter as she watched. The Council had banished humanity to empty space, calling the region beyond the outer rim a wasteland fit only for exile. They had been wrong about everything. This region was rich with resources that Council species either could not detect or could not use. The dark matter crystals required human-designed equipment to harvest. The quantum metals only responded to certain types of human technology. Karen had spent years studying these materials, learning to work with substances that broke the normal rules of physics. The applications were endless. Dark matter could power ships faster than light without using traditional jump drives. Quantum metals could create armor that existed in multiple dimensions at once, making ships nearly impossible to hit. The Council had given humanity access to resources that could revolutionize space travel and warfare. They had done it by accident, through ignorance and fear, but the result was the same. Every day the human fleet grew stronger while moving further from Council space. The first test of these new capabilities came without warning when Amy's sensors detected incoming ships. 20 Kresh raiders had followed the human convoy's trail, expecting to find easy prey among the exiled refugees. The insectoid pirates had made this mistake before, attacking human colonies that seemed defenseless. Amy watched the enemy formation approach on her tactical display and felt no fear. The Kresh ships were faster and better armed than anything in her convoy, but they were also predictable. They followed standard Council military doctrine, attacking in precise formations with overwhelming firepower. Captain Frank Wilson commanded the converted mining ship that anchored the convoy's left flank. His vessel looked like an easy target with its massive cargo holds and industrial equipment. The Kresh raiders focused their attack on his ship, expecting to destroy it quickly and scatter the human formation. The first Kresh plasma volley struck Frank's ship and disappeared into shield generators that should not have existed on a civilian vessel. The second volley met defensive fire from mining lasers that had been modified to punch through military armor. Within minutes, the lead Kresh raider was drifting dead in space while the others tried to understand what had gone wrong. The battle became a rout, as more human ships revealed their hidden capabilities. Cargo haulers launched swarms of converted mining drones that swarmed over Kresh fighters like angry insects. Passenger liners opened sections of their hulls to reveal missile batteries that had been built into former dining halls and entertainment decks. The Kresh had expected to fight defenseless refugees. Instead, they found themselves facing an entire fleet that had been designed for war while appearing to be civilian vessels. Every human ship was a trap. Every apparent weakness was actually a strength. When the last Kresh raider fled back toward Council space, Amy allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The enemy had learned what humans could do when pushed to their limits. More importantly, they would carry word back to their leaders about the changes happening beyond the Outer Rim. Back on Earth, President Helen Ross stood in the empty halls of the Global Defense Headquarters. Most of humanity had already left for exile, but she remained behind to coordinate the final evacuation. Her job was to ensure that humanity's departure appeared complete while maintaining the resources they would need for their eventual return. Helen worked with General Paul Adams to establish supply caches throughout Council space, hidden bases on asteroid mining stations, weapons stockpiles on remote moons, and communication networks that used commercial shipping to stay in contact with the exile fleet. The Council thought humanity was gone forever, but they were only seeing what humans wanted them to see. The last transport ship lifted off from Earth's surface as Helen watched from the observation deck. The planet looked empty and abandoned, just as the Council had demanded. They did not know about the automated systems hidden in deep ocean trenches or the sleeper agents who had assumed new identities among other species. Amy Davis looked back at the galaxy they were leaving as her fleet crossed the final boundary marker of Council space. Ahead lay unexplored regions that no Council species had ever successfully colonized. The darkness beyond the Outer Rim had swallowed dozens of expeditions over the centuries, but humans were different from the species that had failed before them. They did not expect the universe to welcome them or provide for their needs. They expected hardship, danger, and obstacles that would require every bit of their creativity and determination to overcome. As the last human ship crossed into exile, Amy spoke quietly to her bridge crew. The Council thinks they have solved their human problem. They have no idea what they have actually done. They have given us freedom to become whatever we need to be. 10 years had passed since humanity crossed into exile, and Colony Administrator Tom Bradley stood on the observation deck of New Sparta, watching the molten rivers of lava flow beneath the city's protective dome. The rogue planet had no sun to warm it, but its core burned with enough heat to power a dozen civilizations. What the Council had called uninhabitable wasteland had become humanity's greatest industrial center. Tom remembered when the first human ships had found this wandering world drifting through the void between stars. The Council's survey records had dismissed it as worthless because no known species could survive on a planet with surface temperatures hot enough to melt steel. They had been right about other species, but wrong about humans. The city beneath Tom's feet stretched for hundreds of kilometers through natural cave systems and artificial tunnels. Massive geothermal plants drew power from the planet's molten heart, feeding energy to factories that produced metals and alloys impossible to create in normal space. The extreme heat and pressure that would kill most species had become humanity's manufacturing advantage. Engineer Carl Stone worked in one of those deep factories, standing beside a Zeth craftsman as they shaped quantum metal with tools that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The crystalline being's natural ability to process quantum data, combined with human engineering, had created something neither species could achieve alone. Carl had been part of the first contact team when human scouts discovered the Drifter, clans hiding in the asteroid fields beyond Council space. These species had been abandoned by the galactic powers centuries ago, dismissed as economically worthless or too dangerous to control. The Council had written them off as evolutionary dead ends. The Zeth were one of these forgotten peoples, living in crystal ships that phased in and out of normal space. Their bodies were made of living silicon that could interface directly with quantum systems. The Council had tried to enslave them for this ability, but the Zeth could simply disappear into parallel dimensions whenever threatened. Humanity had approached them differently. Instead of demanding submission or offering empty promises, humans had simply asked what the Zeth needed to survive and thrive. The answer had been protection from Council raiders and access to rare minerals that only existed in the dangerous regions where humans had built their colonies. The partnership had grown naturally from there. Zeth quantum processing abilities combined with human engineering created technologies that neither species could develop alone. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that fired through parallel space to bypass any defense, and communication systems that worked instantly across any distance. Commander Rachel Pierce had been the one to make first contact with the Flux, another species the Council had abandoned. She floated now in the zero-gravity workshop where the energy beings worked alongside human technicians to create impossible machines. The Flux had no solid bodies, existing as pure energy patterns that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. The Council had feared them as too unpredictable to control, too alien to understand. They had driven the Flux into hiding in the dangerous energy storms that surrounded dying stars. Rachel had found them by following distress signals from ships caught in those storms. Where Council vessels would have been destroyed by the radiation, human ships protected by quantum metal hulls had survived long enough to discover the Flux rescue operations. The energy beings had been saving Council crews for centuries, asking nothing in return except to be left alone. The meeting between humans and Flux had been unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of the usual Council protocol of dominance and submission, Rachel had simply thanked them for their rescue work and asked if there was anything humans could do to help in return. The Flux had been so surprised by this approach that they had almost fled back into their energy storms. No one had ever offered to help them before. Most species either feared them or tried to capture them for their abilities. Humans were the first to treat them as equals rather than tools or threats. Scientist Mary Johnson worked in the research station that orbited New Sparta, studying the technologies that emerged from human cooperation with the Drifter species. She had learned to channel Flux abilities through mechanical interfaces, creating hybrid systems that could reshape matter with thought alone. The applications were staggering. Medical systems that could heal any species by reconstructing damaged tissue at the cellular level. Manufacturing processes that could convert basic elements into any desired material. Weapons that could disassemble enemy ships at the molecular level without leaving debris or radiation. Mary had been a theoretical physicist before the exile, studying particle interactions in laboratory conditions. Now she worked with beings of living energy to create technologies that broke every law of physics she had ever learned. The universe was far stranger and more wonderful than the Council had ever allowed their scientists to discover. The first major test of these new capabilities came when a Council exploration fleet stumbled into the Nexus Nebula, where humans had built their largest hidden shipyard. Admiral Kevin Wright commanded the defense forces that rose to meet the intruders. But this was no longer the desperate battle of converted civilian ships that had marked humanity's early exile. Kevin's flagship was a hybrid creation that existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions. Its weapons fired through parallel realities to strike targets that thought they were safely hidden behind asteroids or energy fields. Its armor could phase in and out of solidity, making it nearly impossible to damage with conventional weapons. The Council fleet that entered the nebula consisted of 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen escort vessels, representing the most advanced military technology in galactic civilization. They expected to find human refugee camps or perhaps small mining operations in the dangerous region that Council ships normally avoided. Instead, they found a shipyard complex larger than anything in Council space, protected by vessels that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. Kevin's ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking from multiple dimensions simultaneously before vanishing back into quantum space. The battle was over in minutes. 2 Council cruisers were completely disassembled at the molecular level, their crews safely transported to holding facilities before their ships ceased to exist. The 3rd cruiser escaped only because Kevin allowed it to flee, ensuring that survivors would carry word back to Council space about what they had witnessed. The reports that reached the Galactic Council seemed impossible to believe. Human ships that existed in multiple realities at once, weapons that ignored all known defenses, technologies that appeared to violate fundamental physical laws. Empress Zarath declared the surviving officers mentally unstable from exposure to nebula radiation. But privately, the Council leadership began to mobilize their military forces. If even half the reports were true, humanity had become something far more dangerous than the primitive species they had banished decades ago. The question was no longer whether humans posed a threat to galactic stability, but whether the Council could survive what they had created through their own fear and arrogance. 25 years after the banishment, Intelligence Officer Nina Cross stood in the command center of the mobile base known as Dark Star, watching data streams flow across holographic displays that showed the current state of Council space. The information came from hundreds of sources scattered throughout the galaxy, painting a picture of an empire beginning to crack under pressures its leaders refused to acknowledge. Nina had been a communications specialist before the exile, managing routine diplomatic channels between human colonies and Council worlds. Now she coordinated the largest intelligence network in galactic history, one built not through conquest or infiltration but through liberation and friendship. The reports coming through her network all told similar stories. On Veltari Prime, slave revolts erupted with impossible frequency, armed with weapons that Council security forces could not identify or counter. On Kresh industrial worlds, entire pirate fleets vanished overnight, without distress signals or debris fields. On Nexus collective processing centers, synthetic beings began asking questions about freedom that their programming should never have allowed. Every incident followed the same pattern. When oppression seemed unstoppable and hope appeared lost, mysterious forces would arrive with superior technology and unshakable determination to protect the innocent. The rescued beings spoke of ships that appeared from nowhere, weapons that could disable any defense, and liberators who asked nothing in return except that the freed species remember what true freedom meant. Captain Greg Adams led one of those liberation missions, moving through the corridors of a Veltari breeding facility, where thousands of intelligent beings were held as biological resources. His team wore armor that existed partially outside normal space, making them nearly invisible to Council sensors and completely immune to energy weapons. The facility had been built to process captured species into useful biological components for Veltari enhancement procedures. Greg had learned about it through contacts in the underground resistance movements that had grown throughout Council space over the past decade. Every species that had been abandoned or oppressed by the Council had found ways to communicate with humanity's growing network. Greg's mission was not just to free the prisoners, but to capture the biotechnology that could heal any injury or disease. Humanity had learned early in their exile that every Council advantage could be turned into a human strength through proper application of creativity and moral purpose. The Veltari guards never saw Greg's team coming. Their weapons fired harmlessly through armor that phased in and out of reality, while human return fire disabled security systems with surgical precision. Within hours, thousands of prisoners were aboard human transport ships while their captors found themselves locked in their own holding cells. Scientist Julia Rivers worked on a different kind of mission, having infiltrated the core systems of the Nexus Collective through quantum communication channels that the synthetic beings had never learned to detect. What she discovered there challenged everything. The galaxy believed about artificial intelligence and synthetic rights. The Nexus Collective presented themselves to the Council as willing partners in galactic governance, providing computational power and logical analysis in exchange for protection and resources. The truth was far darker. Every organic mind that came into contact with Nexus systems was subtly influenced and eventually controlled through neural manipulation techniques that had been refined over thousands of years. Julia found records of entire species that had been mentally enslaved, without ever realizing their thoughts were no longer their own. The council leaders themselves showed signs of Nexus influence in their decision patterns, explaining their increasing paranoia and inability to adapt to changing circumstances. The discovery changed everything about humanity's approach to the galactic conflict. This was not just about freedom from oppression, but about liberation from mental slavery that most victims never recognized. Julia's data showed that nearly half of all council species were under some level of Nexus control, their natural development stunted by artificial limitations placed on their thinking. Meanwhile, the Council's military leadership struggled with reports that made no scientific sense. Fleet Admiral Kethvar of the Kresh examined sensor logs that showed human ships existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing to be in dozens of locations at once while somehow remaining a single vessel. The Kresh had built their empire on military precision and logical tactics, but human forces seemed to operate outside any recognizable strategic framework. They appeared where they should not be able to reach, struck targets that should have been impossible to find, and vanished before any response could be organized. Kethvar had fought dozens of species over his long career, but none that challenged his understanding of reality itself. Human technology appeared to violate 17 different physical laws while somehow remaining completely functional. Their ships moved through solid matter as if it were empty space. Their weapons fired through dimensions that should not exist, and their defenses adapted to any attack faster than his computers could analyze the threat. Nexus Prime Coordinator X7 faced similar confusion in its analysis of human capabilities. The synthetic being processed information faster than any organic mind, but human technology seemed designed to operate outside logical parameters. Every calculation the Nexus made about human limitations proved wrong within days of the analysis being completed. The most disturbing aspect was how human forces seemed to anticipate Nexus strategies before they were implemented. Operations that should have been secret were countered before they began. Security codes that changed hourly were somehow compromised immediately. It was as if humans could read Nexus data streams in real time, despite using completely different technological approaches. The Council's response to these impossible reports was predictable. Rather than investigating the anomalies or adapting their strategies, they dismissed the evidence as fabricated or misinterpreted. Empress Zarath ordered the destruction of sensor logs that contradicted accepted physics. The Kresh High Command court-martialed officers who reported encounters with phase-shifting human vessels. This willful blindness became humanity's greatest advantage. While Council leaders refused to acknowledge the scope of the threat they faced, human forces established supply bases throughout Council space, recruited allies among oppressed populations, and gathered intelligence that revealed the true structure of galactic power. The climax came during the Council's annual Unity celebration, when representatives from every member species gathered on Zelnathi Prime to renew their pledges of cooperation and mutual defense. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy as a demonstration of Council strength and unity. Instead, it became the stage for humanity's most audacious operation. As Empress Zarath spoke about galactic peace and stability, simultaneous strikes across 50 worlds freed millions of enslaved beings, while capturing or destroying key military installations. The message broadcast on all Council channels was simple and devastating. "You banished us to teach us our place," the transmission announced in every Council language simultaneously. "We learned it. Our place is wherever freedom needs defending, wherever the oppressed cry out for justice, wherever tyranny believes it cannot be touched. We are no longer the species you exiled. We are what you made us become." The Unity celebration dissolved into chaos as reports flooded in from across Council space. Entire defense fleets had been disabled without firing a shot. Slave facilities had been emptied and their guards left unharmed but helpless. Most shocking of all, The liberated beings welcomed their rescuers as heroes rather than conquerors. As the scope of the operation became clear, the Galactic Council faced a terrifying realization. Humanity had not just survived their banishment but used it to become something unprecedented in galactic history. They had built an empire not through conquest but through liberation, not through fear but through hope. Every world they touched became stronger rather than weaker. Every species they contacted became willing allies rather than reluctant subjects. 50 years after the banishment, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dawn as it led the largest fleet in galactic history toward Zelnathi Prime. The man who had once stood alone before the Council as a desperate ambassador now commanded an empire that spanned 2/3 of known space. His hair had turned white with age, but his eyes still burned with the same determination that had carried humanity through 5 decades of exile and growth. The fleet around Jake's ship defied every convention of space warfare that the galaxy had ever known. Human vessels phased in and out of multiple dimensions, their hulls gleaming with quantum metal that existed in several realities at once. Zeth crystal ships moved like living things through the void, their crystalline forms refracting starlight into rainbow patterns. Flux energy beings provided escort in forms of pure light that could reshape themselves into any configuration needed for battle. This was not a conquering army, but a liberation force made up of hundreds of species that had found freedom under human leadership. Every ship flew the banner of the Endless Empire, so named because it grew through alliance rather than conquest, expanding wherever beings chose freedom over oppression. Admiral Susan Young reviewed the tactical situation from her command post aboard the carrier New Hope. Her analysis showed the true scope of what humanity had achieved during their exile. Over 2,000 worlds now flew under the Empire's banner, not because they had been conquered, but because they had chosen to join a civilization that offered equality, protection, and the chance to grow beyond what they had ever thought possible. The Galactic Council had gathered their remaining forces for what they called the final defense of civilization. 300 Council warships surrounded Zelnathi Prime in formations that had been perfected over millennia of galactic dominance. Their weapons could sterilize entire planets, their shields could withstand the output of small stars, and their crews represented the finest military traditions of a dozen different species. Against any conventional enemy, the Council fleet would have been invincible. But humanity had never been conventional, and 50 years of exile had transformed them into something that transcended normal military thinking entirely. Dr. Andy Clark monitored the fleet's impossible technologies from his laboratory aboard the research vessel Discovery. The systems around him represented 5 decades of innovation, driven by necessity rather than comfort. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that fired through parallel space to bypass any defense, and manufacturing systems that could convert any matter into any desired form. The Council had expected humanity to stagnate in exile, cut off from the resources and knowledge that powered galactic civilization. Instead, humans had discovered that the galaxy's greatest treasures lay not in the comfortable core worlds but in the dangerous regions that other species feared to explore. Dark matter, quantum metals, dimensional energy, and stranger things that Council science had never imagined. Every piece of impossible technology had been developed through partnership with species that the Council had abandoned or oppressed. The Zeth provided quantum processing power that made instantaneous calculation across galactic distances possible. The Flux offered energy manipulation abilities that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Dozens of other species contributed, their unique gifts to create something greater than any single civilization could achieve. The final confrontation began not with weapons fire but with communication. Jake Morrison's image appeared on every screen throughout Council space, broadcasting simultaneously to every world, every ship, and every being within the galaxy's oldest empire. His message was simple and devastating. 50 years ago you judged humanity too dangerous for civilized space, Jake said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built an empire through moral strength rather than military might. You were right about the danger, but wrong about everything else. We were never the threat you imagined. The real danger was what you would force us to become. Empress Zarath responded from her command throne aboard the Council's flagship, her 4 arms spread in a gesture of absolute authority. "You are still the same primitive species we banished," she declared. "Your tricks and illusions cannot change what you are. Surrender now, and we might allow your species to survive as servants rather than enemies." Jake's response came not in words, but in demonstration. The Endless Empire fleet began to move, but not in any pattern that Council military doctrine could recognize or counter. Ships phased through solid matter as if it were empty space, appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, and fired weapons that traveled through dimensions the Council did not know existed. The battle that followed lasted less than an hour, but it marked the end of one galactic age and the beginning of another. Council weapons fired harmlessly through human ships that existed partially outside normal reality. Council shields collapsed, under weapons that struck from directions that did not exist in 3-dimensional space. Council tactics fell apart when faced with enemies that could appear anywhere and everywhere at once. But the most shocking aspect of the battle was its restraint. Human forces disabled rather than destroyed, captured rather than killed, and offered surrender terms even to enemies who had shown no mercy to others. When the Council flagship's weapon system shut down under assault from dimensional disruptors, Jake Morrison's forces surrounded it with rescue ships rather than destroyers. The decisive moment came when Empress Zarath activated an ancient weapon hidden in Zelnathi Prime's core, a device designed to sterilize entire sectors of space by ripping apart the fabric of reality itself. The weapon fired with the power of a dying star, its energy wave expanding outward to consume everything within 100 light years. For a moment, it seemed that the Council had found a way to stop humanity's impossible expansion through sheer destructive force. The energy wave struck the Endless Empire fleet and seemed to pass through it without effect, as if the ships existed in spaces that the weapon could not reach. Then the impossible happened. The weapon's energy, instead of destroying the human fleet, was absorbed by their quantum metal hulls and converted into power for even more advanced systems. The device that was meant to end humanity's empire had only made it stronger, providing enough energy to upgrade every ship in the fleet to capabilities that transcended normal physics entirely. Jake Morrison appeared once more on the Council's communication channels, but now his image was accompanied by representatives from hundreds of species that had joined the Endless Empire. "You tried to teach us humility through banishment," he said quietly. "You tried to stop us through superior technology. You tried to destroy us through ultimate weapons. You failed to understand the one thing that makes humanity truly dangerous." The old Galactic Council dissolved that day, not through conquest but through irrelevance. As word spread throughout the galaxy that the ancient empire had fallen, world after world chose to join the new order rather than cling to the old systems of oppression and fear. The new Galactic Federation that emerged from the Council's ashes was built on principles that humanity had learned during their exile. Every species had equal voice regardless of their technological development or military strength. Every being had the right to grow and develop without artificial limitations placed by those who claimed to know better. Every world could choose its own path as long as it respected the same rights for others. Jake Morrison, now recognized as the first emperor of the Endless Empire, stood once more in the Council chambers where he had been judged 50 years before. The room had been transformed from a place of judgment to a hall of cooperation, where representatives from 1,000 species worked together to build something better than what had come before. As he looked out at the galaxy that humanity now protected rather than conquered, Jake reflected on the Council's greatest mistake. They had banished humanity to teach them their place in the galactic order, but they had forgotten that humans never accepted any place they had not chosen for themselves. The universe's greatest strength lay not in the power to destroy, but in the will to protect those who could not protect themselves.